the Cape Crusaders in need of a new chiropractor. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys, DC Multiverse Bane. Born on the island of Santa Prisca, the boy who would become Bane was raised within the confines of the nation's cruelest prison, where he honed his mind by reading any books he could get his hands on. After decades of imprisonment, he was chosen for an experimental testing a super steroid called Venom. Not only did Venom work, but it gave Bane the strength to escape. He then set his sights on Gotham City, a place of which he had heard many legends, with one goal in mind: break Batman. Yeah, Bruce better watch that he doesn't get his back broken. Before we get a closer look at Bane, let's grab the tape measure just to see how tall this figure stands. As you probably can already imagine, this figure was on a wish list of mine for a while, and finally got my hands on Bane. Taking it right to the very top of his head, the figure stands impressively at about 8.5 inches in height, or Bane is about 21.5 centimeters tall. Bring in a couple other rogues of a really large size. Here's what Bane looks like next to Man-Bat. And while I would have initially told you that Man-Bat would have still been bigger than Bane, not the case. They're about the same size. Speaking of other figures that are almost about the same size, here's what he also looks like next to Clayface. Some pretty big boys we're having to contend with. Well, I don't have to contend with them. This guy's going to have to contend with them. Here's what the figure also looks like next to DC Rebirth Batman. I thought Batman from Rebirth would have been a good size-wise to have displayed along with Bane. Bane would have to have been towering over Batman. And this Batman is a good average-size Batman to have displayed along with the rest of these rogues. One other comparison I thought would be fun as well is to move over the Bane from McFarlane's team and bring in the Bane, the Build-A-Figure Bane from the DC Universe wave, who I thought would have been a big Bane, but yeah, when you're comparing him against the newer Bane, I feel even sorry now for this collect and connect Build-A-Figure Bane that we've got the years before. Obviously, a figure of Bane's stature is not going to come included with much of anything. The figure comes included with a display stand, yes. Figure also comes included with a trading card, sure. And that makes up the majority of his accessories, and I'm fine by that. First of which, the one thing I am really quite happy with is the trading card that comes included with Bane. Figure photography. Source material, at least to show you what the character is capable of doing. You can see he's pumping his blood full of venom. I love the way they've actually got the little slime there on the front of his face there as well. The remains, the remnants of the venom that's pumping through him. What a great looking image. I'm glad to see that they were able to use this and not figure photography. On the back of the card, by the way, one thing to point out is that the figure's real name is unknown. Nobody knows this guy's name. And quite a meaty read-up, too. You can either pause and read for yourself. It happens to also be the same thing I read at the beginning of this video. Is that what we do? That's what we do here on this channel. Let's move that to the side. The figure also comes included with a display stand. A standard-sized stand with the DC logo branded down below. One singular peg, once again. I'm stating already all the obvious points about this display stand. It is literally the same stand we've gotten with every other figure. By the way, though, the stand does attach to either one of Bane's feet, as he does have holes provided on the backs of his heels. Figure, though, stands fine. Don't really necessarily need this, so it can flying saucer its way to the side of the screen. As for the actual figure itself, I love the look of Bane here. It's not perfect. There are things, of course, we're going to talk about in this review, but overall, my general consensus of Bane is he's a pretty cool looking figure. Picking him up right away, getting a closer look at him. One thing I really like about this Bane is, first of all, he's a classic looking Bane. We don't have to open up his mouth, having his lips, the ability to move. I know that was one thing they brought into the animated series, but I never really liked the Bane with a mouth visible. I was really like the more luchador mask, and this is a classic looking Bane. Was it Batman 497? I'm just trying to, I wasn't expecting to pop that out of my mouth, but I think it was Batman 497, the breaking of the bats. I'm going to look into that between takes. But yeah, it's a great looking Bane. From a head sculpt standpoint, the only thing I would really point out is the fact that I find his mask is a little too gray. Just a tad bit gray. I would have lightened that up just a little bit and maybe made it a little bit closer to white. It doesn't have to be stark white. It didn't have to be too bright, too much of an eyesore. But maybe meet us in the middle and have more of a lighter gray, or maybe even just darker gray in some of the areas and make it majority white. I think the mask is just a tad bit too gray. One thing that's nice is that they actually did put the zipper along the top. Big red eyes there as well. I do like the panel lining that they put around the eyes, so the eyes do stand out. And I also like the way they've textured the mask too. Even just given a faint trace, a faint indication that he does have ears underneath the mask by how tight that's stretched across his face. Great looking mask. Just needed to be a little bit lighter, I think, in the white portions. It's way too gray for me. Of course, if you connect the dots and connect the one end to the other, running from the back of his head is, of course, the neon green tubes, pumping the venom into his bloodstream. This, of course, has all been accomplished by the fact he does have this big giant tank on the back of his torso. The tank is actually attached not necessarily to his tank top, but rather actually a harnessed strap that wraps around the front of the figure's body. I'm not as crazy about the idea that this is here. I do wish that this could have been removed where he would have just had the more classic tank top. Put your hand down. Put your hand down. I wish that they could have actually had the means to remove this, but understanding where the tank had to be attached to, it's not attached to this after all, it's attached to this. Maybe the one thing I would have done differently is maybe remove the connecting straps in the middle and just have a full experience of Bane's big broad chest. Why are we talking about that? He does have a couple little pockets there down below. They're made of a softer plastic. This at least is a darker brown, and it's different from the rest of the black around it, so it does nicely break things up. But the rest of his body, I mean, it's static. It's standard, classic Bane. Fingerless gloves. Everybody was wearing fingerless gloves. That's a Lonely Island reference. Somebody asked me, where did you get that reference from? Everyone's wearing fingerless gloves? That's Boombox. Lonely Island. You can look it up online. He does have the activation switch, of course, that runs and pumps the venom into his bloodstream, into his arm, of course. It's there. And, of course, he's got the main one being in the top. It does limit a little bit when it comes to the articulation of the figure. Moving the head back and forth, I'm a little weary. Of course, I don't want to have any of those hoses break accidentally. The arm is also the same thing as well. He does have a hinge, obviously, in his elbow, which I have to say is quite tight on this figure. But at least there's very little mileage that you can actually get from the arms. Even to rotate the arms, it's only to about here where I would have to tell myself, stop. Don't go any further with what you're about to do, because that's going to break the hose. It's already tight right now. So I would say probably keep it at about that level. You know, keep it nice and loose. Again, for the rest of the figure's body, he's got the belt there that's all done in a dark gunmetal gray with a single orb in the middle done in a very bright red, or kind of a dark burgundy. It's very similar, in fact, like to the one he actually has, the eyes on his mask itself. But really, all the rest of the Bane is all done here in black plastic. I don't think that they've actually gone and painted any bit of the actual pants. I think it's just the molding of the black plastic, which again, I'm fine with. His arms and the rest of his chest, from what at least we can see, is nicely detailed. I do like they've added some very necessary veinage there on both his forearms. It's literally just popping at the seams. I do think, though, that the flesh coloring that they used, the paint that they used, is a little too caked on. Not even necessarily caked on, but I think it would have been nice to maybe add some lighter colors added in there as well. It's really only one singular color. There's only one mono color being used here. And if they had only had the chance to go in there and just kind of darken up some of the veins, just so, again, it's more than just the one color that we're looking at right here. But other than that, I mean, there's nothing other than those points. The coloring of his skin, just adding a little bit of like descriptive paint added in there just for the veins, lightening up the coloring of his mask. And again, while I'm not necessarily a fan of this necessarily here in the front, I understand why that has to be there in order to hold the tank that's on the back of his body. For the articulation here on Bane, we're going to go and break down things as quicker than he's going to be breaking the bat. Head rotates back and forth. It does look somewhat up, somewhat down, and you can also rock it back and forth. Again, you can only rotate the head so far anyways. Nothing to the point where I feel like any hose breakage is going to actually happen. Even if I was to rotate it this way, there's still more than enough mileage here for the tubes. Nothing where I'm really going to be worried necessarily. The upper torso is on a very generous ball joint as well. The arms do come out, by the way. Very big, broad arms. I love the fact that they gave him these big, giant tree trunks for arms. The arms rotate also all the way around. Figure does have no bicep swivel, and he doesn't really technically have either a forearm swivel either. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't put a bicep in there, at least a bicep cut. You can rotate the arm, and you can't really even rotate the arm this way either. So it's only really just the shoulder doing all the work of the figure's articulation in his arm. Hands rotate at least all the way around, though. You can hinge those back and forth. And then, of course, when you get to the legs themselves, the legs seem once again to be on ratcheted joints. Why do we keep continuing to go back to the derogatory crotch shot of these figures? But there's a ratcheted joint. This, by the way, is a softer plastic, once again, to conceal the joint and make things a little bit easier when it comes to moving the legs. Speaking of the legs go forward, they do go back. There's a swivel at the top of the thigh, a double hinge on the knee. And when we get to these feet, which I don't even think we actually spent any bit of time talking about, nice laced up boots. Again, it looks like they're probably just using the black plastic, but that's fine. It gets the job done. Ankles move back and forth this way. There's an ankle pivot also working there. And also, would you believe, there's toe articulation here on the figure as well. Happy. Happy would be the one simple word to describe how I'm feeling right now, finally having Bane in hand. Dare I say, this is the best Bane that we've ever gotten in a plastic figure. Yeah, of course, there was the DC Direct Nightfall Bane. Very limited, a very staction figure with very few points of articulation. Of course, we did bring in the Collect and Connect DC Universe Classics Bane, which for me, at the longest time, was the go-to Bane that we had in our collection space, but this guy replaces it. Short of the few things I would probably have done differently, lightening up the coloring of this mask, making it just a little bit, just a tad bit whiter, and maybe bringing out some of the details of the veins that they sculpted into his body, couldn't be any bit happier with what we got here from McFarlane's team. I ended up checking online, and sure enough, it was Batman 497. Still have, in fact, that original comic I picked up as a kid is still part of my collection to this day, and Nightfall is one of my all-time favorite comic runs, right up there with the death of Superman. I did my best to try to replicate the look of 497 here in final looks, as Batman is finally getting his back broken by Bane. That's a lot of B's. Little harder to do, but a lot easier to do when you've got a smaller frame Batman like the one from DC Rebirth. A bigger, bulkier Batman just wouldn't do if you want to get a look looking like this. And the figure does a decent enough job for right now, at least, at balancing it. Not though sure whether I'm going to do this long term, but at least it looks nice when you're wrapping up a video for the day of what my favorite is, what my favorite Bane has been in plastic form. Yes, there's the few little things that I talked about sprinkled in this review, the things I would have just changed, but the things I would have changed are only more cosmetic than anything else. The mold is good. It's a classic looking Bane, which I've wanted right from day one. And I think McFarlane's team has once again done a stellar job of giving us a Bane of appropriate size. This Bane didn't need to be a regular size figure, and he's bigger and he's bulkier than Batman. That's the way it should be. I'm really, really happy with the way this one turned out. Have you had the chance, though, to pick up Bane? I know he's been circulating around online for a while. I finally got the chance to find this guy at a decent enough price, in fact. And when the price was going for what it was, I said to myself, I'm not going to pass and wait any longer for this guy. I know I'm going to want him. I know I'm going to want to add him to my collection. And now I've finally done all those steps. I can finally now appreciate Bane for putting on the shelf. And I might even, in fact, move the DC Multiverse, the DC Universe Classics Bane, I should say. I'm going to probably put him back in storage because for a while I had him on display. He didn't seem right really with the rest of the DC Multiverse stuff we've been getting from McFarlane's team, but he was a stand-in for right now, or right at that moment, until I finally fulfilled the dream of getting this Bane in hand. I don't dream very big, but finally getting this guy in hand, I couldn't be any bit happier. What do you guys think of Bane? Let me know down below in the comments section whether you picked the figure up for yourself or based on this review and this review alone. Also, if you enjoyed this video, speaking of which, why don't you hit it with a like. If you're loving the content you're seeing, maybe you want to stick around for more. Thank you for that. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. While we have wrapped up things for quite an awkward moment here, poor Batman. If it was in the Dark Knight Rises movie, all you'd have to do is get thrown down into a well prison somewhere and you'd be back to normal. What was that all about? Batman's crippled at the beginning of the movie, and then by the time he's battling Bane at the very end of the movie, he's fine? Is that really how movie making is working? But anyways, more DC Multiverse reviews will be coming your way. So as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.